Hey, this is Professor Homa. Welcome to CSE 235 Advanced Web Programming, and this will be ex6. We're still going to be working with the tip calculator. We're going to call this tipcalc2 ex6, and we're just going to make some variations to it. This is the one that we worked on last time. Just for a review, we put in a value, and then we choose one of three tips, 15%, 20%, and 25%, and then we get a tip amount and we get a total charge at the end. Now the problem with this is we can't do anything in between, and also in terms of writing code we had to basically copy our function 3 times. We had to copy it and then change the percentage that was in there each time, which wasn't a big deal, but then if you had to make changes to each function you'd have to do it 2 separate times after that. So we're going to try to do things a little more efficient, and then we'll also make our tip calculator a little more flexible. It's still not going to be, super crazy yet, but it's going to be a little more flexible. So this is an example of what we're moving to next, and this will be kind of the same thing. We'll put in a value, and I'll just put in a value of 100. There's a default value of 15 that's already set in there, and then you can adjust it. If you want to, if you're a 20% tipper, you can see the tip of 20%. If you wanted to go higher, then you have any amount, you can do that. So that helps sometimes if you're someone who likes to keep your numbers even. If you had a bill that was 105, and then you saw the tip and you're like, oh, that's 23, I'd like to go up a little more. You could kind of go up here and then, give them a $25 tip or something like that. Sometimes people are obsessed with those little numbers and things, like me. This gives you a little more flexibility. We don't have a slider yet, and yes, we do have to keep hitting the tip button, the C tip button, to kind of update it each time. But we're just taking a step here and trying to make our code a little more efficient and a little more flexible. So that's what we're going to do, and we're going to take what we already have. You're going to start with the ex5, you're going to save it over as ex6, and that's what you're going to do next. So that's what we're going to work on, and just a couple things I'll point out before we start doing that. I shortened this thing a little bit, so there'll be a little bit of CSS we could throw in there to just shorten it, just shorten these boxes so they're not quite as wide. Same thing here, we don't want this box real wide for 15% in there. And so we're still going to have 3 buttons. We're going to have, this is a button, this is a button, and this is a button. And we're going to have actually 3 separate functions. This function is going to make that number go down, this button is going to make that number go up, and then this button is basically going to generate what we did last time and put everything together. So that's kind of what we're doing. So it's not really that much of a huge step, but it's a little bit of a step, and it'll give you more practice of writing functions with JavaScript. So that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to go back to my other one, and what I'd recommend first is give it a name. And if this is your previous one, just call it ex6 dash, and I'll just call it tipcalc2, and then do save as new.js. So then you have a new one, and then your other one is safe. Now, what you're going to do with this one, and remember this is the previous one, so you're going to start making some changes. So I'll go through some of those changes. We're going to repurpose some of these buttons here. We'll have a less than button, a greater than button, and then a C tip button. So we could use the buttons we have here. I'm going to wipe out any functions that are here for now. So we're kind of reconfiguring this. I'm going to take these functions out, so it won't work for a little while. We still are going to have 3 buttons, so I'll use the ones that are here, and the one is going to be just have a less than sign. Now, the first thing you'll see is that if you have a less than sign, it thinks you're trying to put an HTML tag. So you have a little problem here that you have to put in basically a symbol for a less than sign. Well, I'll just show you this. You can look it up on W3 Schools or Google it anywhere, but the symbol for less than sign I'll show you is basically an ampersand. That typically starts off any HTML special code. It's an ampersand, and then it has less than LT, and then ampersand GT for greater than, and then it ends with a semicolon. So just be aware we have to use that. You can't just use an arrow when we do that. So I can't just put an arrow. That's why it's showing red here. There's a problem. So this one will be the less than. So I'll do ampersand LT semicolon, and now the colors look fine. And then this one will be ampersand greater than semicolon, and then this one will be C tip. That'll be the label that we see over here. So if I run the code, so we're well on our way. That's what they should look like. Now we're going to put a little box, an input text field, in between these arrows, where we're going to put the tip percentage is going to be in there. So we'll have to change a couple things in here. So we can copy one of these boxes that are here already, so that you don't have to retype code. Here's the meal one. We'll just copy this. So we'll copy this input, and it's going to go in between the other two. So I'll just paste it in there, and we're going to call this, instead of meal, this one will be, I'm going to call this tip_p for tip percentage. I don't always use underscores in there, but it might be easier to kind of identify it. So it's input text, and it's going to be tip percentage. It has a name of tip_p and an ID. So when we identify it, we'll be using the ID, and then we'll also make variable names that will be the same name. So we'll mirror the variable names to the ID names. That's not a problem of doing that. So let's just see what we have so far. And you can see it's this really big box here. We don't want a giant box for just 15%. And again, we're going to put 15 in there. And we can also put right after it, right after this box that has tip P, we can just put in a percentage sign. So it looks like that. That's fine. And if you wanted a space in front of it, like if you don't like it right up against, although I think it's going to be okay up against, but we're going to shorten this. Now, how do you shorten this? Now, there's HTML you could use to shorten it, or there's CSS. Since we already have CSS, what we'll do is we'll shorten this, and we can even, I'll just copy one of these declarations here in our CSS, and I'll paste it. Now, what I'm going to target, and we could target both of these, and I guess I'll do this one first. I'll target the meal one first. So I'll target meal, and to target it, we have to put a pound sign in front of it, because that targets meal, that targets the ID. CSS looks to the pound sign to know that it's an ID. And all that I'm going to do is just put in a width, and we're just going to put an M value in there. Remember, it's a colon and then a space, and we'll put an M width. And M is about like 16 pixels. It's about 1 character in there. We did that. Our font size is 1M, so it should be almost the height of 1 character. So we probably want it somewhere like, if we put in 2M or 3M, we'll try that out and just see what it looks like, and just save our update. Or we could just run code. And that's a little too short, especially for meal. Meal should probably be at least double that. And I'll run code again. And that's probably good. So we have meal shortened. We're also going to do that with tip P. Remember, we called that tip P. That's the ID. This is the ID here, tip P. So we're going to do one for that. So I'll just copy this, because that's almost similar to the code. And I'll just put in tip_P. And I'll make the width maybe a little smaller. I'll put 3M, and I'll run the code. And that's good. That'll be enough, because we're just going to put in a 15. Our percentage wouldn't be any higher than 2 digits anyway, so that should be fine. We're going to put in 15. We're going to put, it wouldn't be anything more than that. So that should be fine. If you had to put in 3 digits, you could. So that's okay. I guess 2.5 is fine for that right now. So if I want a little space between here so that the C tip moves over, I could go down to my HTML, so it would go right here, and I'll run code again, and that's what I want. I want a little more space here. So if I wanted to put a third one, I could put a third one. I could just copy this. It's not recommended to use a whole lot of non-breaking spaces, but for what we're doing now, that's fine. So it puts a little space between the button and these little buttons over here. So we're in good shape so far. So we have things physically set up, and I just want to make sure, choose the button to choose your tip amount. We're not going to choose the button. Adjust your tip. We could say adjust your tip percentage. So we'll have to change that. So where it says click the button, and you could say click the arrows to adjust your tip percentage, whatever you want to do. And that's good. We'll see how that looks. Click the arrows to adjust tip percentage. And and then you could say NC tip, although it does say C tip on it, so that should be fine. Visually, we're pretty good so far. So I'm going to save what I have so far. So visually, everything looks pretty good. We have it ready to go. Now we just have to do the JavaScript code. Looking at our JavaScript code, we're going to keep these reset boxes the same so that they can reset when we run the code. And we have meal, tip. We're not actually going to, now tip is this one down here. We're not resetting this. What we're actually going to do is put a default amount in here. So we're going to have to put a default amount in here to start. And we could put that, we don't have to put it in the function. We could put it right up here. So I could really do this. I could copy this to start. And maybe I'll just put a space just to separate a little bit. And remember, this is going to be tip P, tip_P, and the value, and what we're going to set the value to be initially, and we want to put quotes there because we want it to be a number, and we want to make sure we keep it a number. We'll put it at 15 to start. So that basically sets the value of tip P to be 15. And I'll run the code, and that's what it looks like right now. So that's okay, and we want to make sure that it translates as a number. So we may have to use parseFloat like we used before to make sure it translates as a number. Now, one thing we can do here, since basically we're putting that value in, we want to create a variable that collects this value, because we want to collect that to create the tip. That's the idea, is we want to have one function that runs the tip instead of 3 last time. Whatever value's in here, when we hit this button, it will use that to generate the new tip, just like we did with 3 separate functions last time. But now we'll multiply whatever this number is, and to hold that number, we want to hold it in a variable. A variable would be able to hold that data for us. So we want to do that. So what we're going to do next, I'll just copy this because there's a lot of copy here. And in front of this, remember when you're declaring a variable, you want to use the var keyword. And we're going to say var, and we could just use the tip p. We'll just use that same var p equals, and we're going to basically get the value. So typically with a variable, you want to have 2 equals in here. You want to get whatever value is in there. So someone will still, whether it stays this way or someone clicks a button to make it go up and down, whatever that value happens to be, we want to pass that along in this variable. So tip p will now be the variable to get passed along. So this first statement basically sets a default of 15. It puts the value in there, it sets the value. Value equals 15. It sets it. This one will basically gather the value, whatever it is, 15, or if it goes up and down, and it'll store it inside of tip p. So tip p will get passed along to help us write any other functions. So I'm going to delete function tipcalc all the way down to the bottom, to wherever my script ends. I want to keep my first one, tipcalc15. I'm going to keep that, and I'm actually I could change the name right away. I'll call it ctip. That'll be my new function. That'll be the function that generates when we do that. So that's going to be ctip. Now we're going to have to change some things in here. Some of these things will stay. So we're going to be adding up things, and I notice already that some of the variables are a little different because I had changed it from total bill to total, so I'll have to change that a little bit. So we're going to be adjusting this one, and some of this stuff will stay. So you could keep what's here right now, and then we'll just delete some things from it. But what we're going to be doing next is we're going to set up 2 functions. One function is going to make this number go down, and one function is going to make that number go up. And that number we're going to get from that variable we just created, var tip p, is going to be the number that's either going to go up and go down. So we're going to do that next. So I'm going to stop here, and then for part 2, we'll start building our first 2 functions that make the number go up and down, and then we'll create our function that basically generates whatever's going to display here.